You think social media gave you a voice. It didn't. It gave you the feeling of a voice, while quietly destroying your ability to actually change anything. The Arab Spring was supposed to prove that Twitter could topple dictators. A decade later, look at those countries. The dictators are still there, or they've been replaced by worse ones. Philosopher Byung-Chul Han predicted this in 2013. He said the digital swarm, the mass of people reacting, sharing, outrage clicking online, has no real power. It has only noise. This is a review of In the Swarm, Digital Prospects. And if you've ever wondered why the internet feels like everyone is shouting and nothing ever changes, this book explains why. Byung-Chul Han is a South Korean-born philosopher who studied metallurgy in Korea before switching to philosophy, theology, and German literature in Germany. He is now a professor at the Berlin University of the Arts and one of the most widely read philosophers in Europe. We have already reviewed his book The Burnout Society on this channel. If you haven't seen that one, link is in the description. In the Swarm is Han at his most politically urgent, where The Burnout Society examined what digital culture does to your inner life. This book examines what it does to your political life, your capacity to act collectively, to build real solidarity, and to resist power that doesn't want to be resisted. The book has 16 short chapters, almost like philosophical essays, each one a grenade thrown at a comfortable assumption about digital life. Rather than go through all 16 individually, I'm going to group them around Han's 5 core arguments, the ideas that run through everything he writes. Let's go. Han's central argument is built on a distinction between a crowd and a swarm. A crowd, in the pre-digital sense, had solidarity. People stood together, shoulder to shoulder, sharing a physical space and a common purpose. They could be dangerous to power, precisely because they were present, embodied, and committed. A digital swarm is different. It gathers around outrage, not around purpose. It is anonymous, temporary, and emotional. It reacts, it does not act. It erupts, it does not endure. Han calls this the shitstorm, his word for the sudden, collective eruption of online outrage that targets an individual or institution, burns intensely for a few days, then disappears without changing anything. The digital swarm mistakes noise for power, and power, real power, knows the difference. Han opens the book with a chapter on respect, and his argument is unexpected. He says respect literally means to look back with consideration and caution. It requires distance, a space between the observer and the observed that allows for reflection, for restraint, for the slow formation of considered judgment. Digital communication collapses that distance. Everything is immediate. Everything is reactive. The gap between feeling and expression, which is where civility, wisdom, and deliberation live, is closed. And he makes a striking comparison. In the pre-digital era, if you were angry enough to write a letter to a newspaper, you had to compose it, address it, post it, and wait for it to arrive. By the time it was published, the immediate rage had usually passed. The friction of the process was also the filter. Today, that friction is gone. You feel, you type, you post in seconds without reflection, without distance, without respect. Han makes a distinction that should alarm anyone who thinks Orwell's vision of totalitarianism is safely in the past. Big Brother. The totalitarianism of the 20th century was visible, feared, and resisted. You knew you were being watched. You knew the state was your enemy, and that knowledge was the foundation of resistance. Big data is different. It watches you through platforms you voluntarily use. It knows your preferences, your fears, your desires, your political leanings, because you told it. Enthusiastically, for free. Han's phrase is devastating. Big Brother has been succeeded by big data. And the difference is that big data doesn't need coercion. It only needs your willing participation. The most sophisticated surveillance system in human history was not built by governments in secret. It was built by corporations in public. And you signed the terms and conditions without reading them. One of Han's most provocative chapters is titled Outrage Society, and it goes against almost everything digital culture assumes about itself. Digital culture prizes transparency, everything exposed, everything public. No secrets, no privacy, no distance. We are told this is freedom. Han argues it is a new form of violence. He distinguishes between negativity, which produces friction, resistance, genuine conflict, and therefore genuine thought, and positivity, the smooth, frictionless circulation of data, images, and opinions that feels like freedom, but is actually a kind of stupefaction. Outrage, he argues, is not political engagement. It is the digital equivalent of a consumer complaint. You are not challenging power. You are producing data for the platform. That sells your attention to advertisers. Every time you share a post in outrage, every time you join a digital campaign, every time you add your voice to the swarm, you are not resisting the system. You are feeding it. Han's final and most politically radical argument: digital communication is not saving democracy. It is destroying it. Democracy, he argues, requires deliberation. The slow, difficult, sometimes boring process of weighing competing arguments, building consensus, and making decisions that serve the long-term common good. Digital communication is the enemy of deliberation. It rewards the immediate, the emotional, the tribal. It turns every political question into a culture war. It makes nuance impossible, and extremism algorithmically profitable. He argues that democratic leaders need space to think, to float ideas without immediate outrage, to change their minds without being destroyed, to make difficult decisions without a swarm of anonymous reactions, determining the outcome before the argument is finished. The digital swarm, Han says, is in the process of abolishing the very conditions that make democratic governance possible, not through revolution, through noise. Now, where does the Islamic tradition stand on all of this? Han's diagnosis is sharp. The digital age has replaced genuine thought with reaction, real solidarity with performative outrage, and deliberate action with impulsive noise. The Islamic tradition has a word for what Han is describing. Not one word, several, and they form a complete alternative framework. The first is hilm, often translated as forbearance or self-restraint. It is the quality of the person who does not react immediately to provocation, who allows the space between stimulus and response to be filled with wisdom rather than impulse. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, is described throughout the Hadith literature as possessing hilm to an extraordinary degree. He was provoked repeatedly and responded with deliberation, not reaction. Han calls for the restoration of distance as the precondition for respect and thought. The Islamic tradition built that distance into the architecture of daily life. Salah 5 times a day is a mandatory pause, a structural interruption of the digital swarm that forces the believer off the feed and into the presence of God. You cannot scroll during sujud. You cannot retweet during dhikr. The act of worship is itself the distance Han is calling for. The second concept is shura, consultation. The Quran commands the believers to conduct their affairs through mutual consultation. Shura is not a Twitter poll. It is not an online petition. It is the slow, embodied, face-to-face deliberation of people who are accountable to each other and to God for the decisions they make. Han mourns the loss of the kind of political community that can actually change things. The Islamic tradition didn't just theorize that community. It built it. In Medina, in the institution of the masjid as public space, in the concept of the Ummah as a body that acts together, not just reacts together online. The digital swarm produces noise. The Islamic community was designed to produce wisdom. The question is whether Muslims will reclaim that design or continue to mistake the swarm for the Ummah. Han wrote this book in 2013, before the 2016 elections, before Cambridge Analytica, before the algorithmic radicalisation of entire societies, before you spent 6 hours on a phone and felt like you'd accomplished nothing. He saw it coming. His warning is simple. The digital swarm will not free you. It will occupy you. It will give you the feeling of action, while making real action harder to organize, harder to sustain, and harder to imagine. The antidote is not another platform. It is not a better algorithm. It is the thing digital culture is designed to make you forget. Presence. Embodied, committed, accountable presence. With real people in real spaces. If this is the kind of thinking you came here for, subscribe and tell me in the comments. Do you think the digital swarm is making the Ummah stronger or weaker? This is the Enlightened study.